Hello, and welcome to another week of the Story Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are wrapping Top 10, Volume 2 of... it's so convoluted. We're calling it Volume 2. It is issues 8 through 12.
It's Volume 2 of Volume 1.
Right. And I have the last page of it. It says end of Season 1. And I was like...
Season 1. That's actually...
my brain just misfired because I was thinking volumes, seasons, issues, whatever. Yeah. We are finishing the Alan Moore, Gene Haas, Zander Cannon selection of Top 10.
Yes, yeah. The original run, issues 8 through 12, which were collected way back in the day as Volume 2.
And I gotta say, Volume 2... I found it, first of all, not as dense or difficult to read as the first volume. Now, maybe that's because you have a little more sense of direction by the time you're reading this. You've got the downward momentum.
I think a little bit of that, but I think also, how do I want to put this? There is very little, all of the, from a specific plot element standpoint, any new plot, and in this case, like any new cases that the cops are on, are pretty much tied back into things that were introduced in the first volume. So one thing that happens here, and it really starts in 8, so it makes sense looking back on it, kind of why they broke it here, because the end of Volume 1, 6 and 7, 6 again was the psychokinetic Santa Claus, and then 7 was the Norse god murder every day story, essentially, right? You basically had two major kind of standalone stories that really focused, for the most part, from a cop standpoint, on Smacks and Toy Box. And starting in 8, they start really tying all the strings together. Not that it's super important, but like there are a whole bunch of callbacks, right? Like we're still dealing with like the increased fallout from the Libra killer. The what's the alien's name is Qualtz, right? You still have the random like D storyline about Dwayne's mom's apartment, and you have and the mice and the cats.
That's the one
which is hysterical but absolutely absurd and means practically nothing, but it's incredibly funny. And then you also have what King Peacock is working on as he's following up on the initial drug bust, homicide, things like that, and we see how all those things start kind of tying together, and they really start calling back and bringing back characters just kind of to show up again. And it starts to feel a little more like, for lack of a better term, a traditional superhero comic. It starts to feel like, course, all the things from the nothing was random, right? Nothing was random.
Which you knew, like if you know Alan Moore, when you open this book, you know he's going to stick the landing. But it's just like,
well, but at the same time,
from a fire hose.
He doesn't have to, though, because of the setup of the book. This book could have gone on and you just close these cases and you work on something else, right? You know, like you don't have to tie in the Libra killer case with like the rave drug bust, the rave party drug bust that Smacks and Toy Box did with the one former kid sidekick turned boy band member, which then gets folded into this larger thing of like a pedophile ring with another set of superhero. Like you don't have to tie all that thing in. They don't have to tie in the drug bust and the homicide with King Peacock going to another parallel world, fighting in a gladiatorial combat, and they'll have the whole thing be orchestrated by the Commissioner Ultima to cover the tracks for the fact that she's a drug addict. Like they tied all the stuff in a way that I think is just, I don't think Alan Moore can help himself. Like, that kind of storytelling is in his blood, but he didn't have to do that. You could just close these cases and move on to the next one. But I think because he was only doing this out of a sense of obligation to his collaborators, again, as we go back and we talk about the history of America's Best Comics back in the Zero episode a couple weeks ago, the idea that he agreed to do this at Wildstorm with Jim Lee at Image, and before it actually came to fruition, Jim Lee sold Wildstorm to DC, the company that Alan Moore swore a blood oath to never work for again, but he copped to it anyway because he had made commitments to artists. So I think there was always a sense of finality, like he's gonna do whatever he was contracted to do, and then he's out, which is why, after he does a follow up with Gene Ha, a follow up with Zander Cannon, and then he's out in terms of top 10. All of his America Best books are like that. They have a run and then he's done. He's not in it for the long haul. So when you look at it from that lens, that as a writer, Alan Moore was only going to spend so much time in this world, it starts to make sense as to why he introduced all those elements early on. And then maybe he didn't want to leave a bunch of like wild loose ends in his story. He leaves two little loose ends, not even loose ends, there's two kind of open plot points at the end of issue 12, and he follows those up with the next spin-off that he works on, that Alan Moore writes. But outside of that, like it seemed like he was done with the top 10 universe after that, which is why Beyond the Furthest Precinct and season 2 are different writers. Even though Zander Cannon and Gene Ha still worked on some of those, Alan Moore wasn't there as a writer,
Right. So where to begin with all of this? Because obviously issue 8 is the lightning rod here with the attention that it gets. However, I was thinking, as 90s as this book feels, issues like 11 and 12 could have been written in the last 18 months. Or even like post 2020. Like I think thematically, it's just it's like I can't think of a better way to say it other than Alan Moore is always living in the world that we have been living in since like 2016. Like when we encounter like bad leaders and brushes with fascism, and the veneer is rubbed off of everything, and we start to see things how they really are. That was Alan Moore in the 90s, and things were generally pretty good in the 90s.
Well, that was Alan Moore in the 80s too. I mean, yeah. It's always been
course.
the way he looks at things.
That's what I'm saying. It's always Alan Moore's thing. Is I think he is like pointing at the world, and at the times when he is doing it with Watchmen. And with top 10 here, there are probably a lot of people who are like, dude, chill out. Like the world is not like that stuff is all behind us. We're not, human nature has risen above that. We're more evolved than that now. Like I met a guy in Copenhagen a few years ago in like 2021, and we have emailed back and forth several times, and he always takes a couple digs at America, all of them totally fair game. And then when Russia invaded Ukraine, he sent me an email and he's like, hey, sorry I make fun of the U.S. military so much. I'm really hoping you guys will do what you always do and come bail us out. Because he's like, but he was like, I genuinely thought like a madman, invading and trying to take over parts of Europe was behind us. He's like,
Yeah.
didn't think it could happen in my lifetime. And I'm like, yeah, I think your parents and grandparents said that, and their parents.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, everyone thinks, like what was World War I called before World War II?
Yeah, it was the Great War.
The Great War, right? It was like,
it was the war.
We're done with that now.
Yeah, exactly.
We did it.
Yeah, capital T, capital W. Yeah.
So
not
I
supposed to have sequels.
Right. But I think this is like the period of time we're in right now is where Alan Moore just needs to sit back and point backwards to all his work. Be like, yep, just go read Watchmen now. It's more relevant than ever. Go read Top 10 now. It's more relevant than ever.
Yeah, V for Vendetta.
He even predicts. V for Vendetta. My gosh. But like here, it's like if you found out the Avengers were wearing a pedophile ring.
Yeah.
And again, people in the Marvel world. But let's take it even in our world. Let's say you found out that I'm not going to name particular actors even at random. Let's just say the actors from the Avengers in our world
Yeah.
were found out to be in a pedophile ring.
Yeah.
The people would react the same way they do, like with the fallen hero type thing. There would be a group of people who are in denial and saying like, no, I don't really believe that. You guys are just like trying to take them down. There would be people who were like devastated, going to burn all my Avengers comics and merchandise. And then there'd be people that are like,
Well, it doesn't
rationalizing it and being
it
like,
doesn't even have to be the specific crime that's kin here. I mean, the idea of any sort of kind of sexual misconduct that we have with celebrities, it's the same parallel.
right. Well, it's just why I'm saying this book
Yeah.
feels
Yeah,
so
yeah,
evergreen,
yeah. Well,
tragically evergreen.
And I think we talked a little last week about how, the first volume feels like the most generic, and this is not a pejorative, it feels like the most generic police procedural, right? It's the mundanity of police work that has happened. I was gonna say superheroes. That's not the right term. Everyone just happens to have superpowers, but we're dealing with the regular generic cases and calls that you get on any other sort of police show, any sort of cop show, and without any direct commentary on the idea of superheroes and costume vigilantes and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're looking at all the Easter eggs, but
the
those
Easter
are
eggs,
less,
those are
those
just
are
there.
more homage than
Those are just there. Those are just
commentary.
there to be fun. I mean, I'm looking at the page right now from issue 8, as like there are literal rubberneckers and his Plastic Man, Elongated Man, Mr. Fantastic. Like it's not them, but it's them. It's
Right.
those are visual gags. They're funny. But when we get to the end of the story about the Seven Sentinels, the Young Sentinels, and all of that, like that does feel like Alan Moore taking a swipe at the idea of why do these superheroes have kid sidekicks again?
Yeah.
Like it's like it's like he can't help himself to take a dig at an industry that like he does. I mean, like I believe he does truly love and enjoy the characters, but he just has a point of view on it that he's always he can't help but kind of take a swipe at it. And that sort of commentary, whether deliberate or subtle, didn't really exist in the first volume. And so that there is kind of a slight morphing of the story into more of a superhero type book. I think in the fact that in issue 8, the first issue of this volume, the fact that we're introduced to the Trans World Station and to the idea of multiple dimensions, parallel Earths, and things like that, which again gives the opportunity for like some fabulous visual Easter eggs and funny kind of meta commentary. But that stuff wasn't present really as a feature of the world in the first volume, in the first 7 issues. And so there's this expansion of the world that makes it feel more like a superhero type world. And I feel like, I mean, clearly it was deliberate, but it was like, we're going to have our setup here, but when we come to the end, like we're going to hit some of these superhero tropes now, kind of like we hit the police procedural tropes, the TV show tropes in the first volume, and there are a lot more superhero tropes we're talking about in the back portion.
Yeah, it's interesting that so I didn't piece together that that the book was leaning more that way. I thought I was just noticing more of that vantage point now. I'm like, yeah, the police stuff, but now I'm reading it for the superhero commentary, which Alan Moore can't help but write. And I do think it's from a place of love, but it is also like deconstruction is his language.
Yeah,
like, that's what he does. He knows how to take things apart and put them on the operating table and study them.
Yeah, it's him saying, we all know what this is, but like at the same time, like it's also kind of silly, right? It's also kind of dumb. Doesn't mean we can't like and read about it, but yeah, he's reliant on the fact that the people reading this are conversant with those conventions, so he can poke holes in it and deconstruct it.
Yeah.
The commentary doesn't work if you don't know what it is. So he is starting from a base assumption that the readership has read this and does know when he makes jokes about infinite Earths and things like that, and like again the stuff with the cats and the mice about like them resetting time and changing continuity and things like that, so the exterminator doesn't get paid because the events never happened. Those are just ridiculous jokes, but they're meant to land in a way where you know what he's talking about, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it works pretty well, and like meta commentary of superheroes is like so overdone now. And there's even like, I mean, like, what was the flaw? Well, hard to pin one flaw, but what was the central flaw of like the DC cinematic universe is, to me, it was that they started with almost a meta take of every character rather than like, here's who the character actually is.
Well, yeah. They were trying. They try to start with a deconstruction of characters and be like, Superman, but not Superman. Superman, but like this. And it's like, well, no, you got to start with
Right. And
with
it's Batman, but it's Batman like this. And
yeah. And the thing that Marvel did was, starting off, they're like, we're gonna take a version of this character, whether it's the contemporary version or a classic version or the Ultimate Universe version, doesn't matter what it is. We're gonna start with a canon version of the character and put this and say this is our version, and it's a version that's recognizable. Whether it is the definitive version from the comics, it didn't really matter. It was an established version versus over at DC when they were trying to do takes on the character.
right.
And it doesn't work when you're trying to establish the character in a way, because you are essentially starting from zero. But a book like this that's about superheroes and recognizable superheroes, but it's not really about superheroes. Again, books that come after this, something like, again, one of my favorite series of all time is Astro City. If you read Astro City, like Kurt Busiek and Brad Anderson, like, they're not even trying to hide. Like, there's a character called the Sumerian. All right, he wears red and blue when he flies around. He's invulnerable. He's an alien from another planet. He's a journalist. Like, he's Superman. There is a Batman. There is a Wonder Woman. There are X-Men. There are the Fantastic Four in Astro City. They're called the First Family. The last name is First, Furst. Like, they're not trying to hide it, but the story is predicated on you already knowing what these tropes are. And a book like Astro City, a book like Top 10, its construction, it's not dependent on it, but it is in some way reliant that you almost, so you can look past those elements and see the story they're trying to tell, which in the beginning is a cop story, right? We're focused on the cop work, on the police work, on investigating and taking these calls, and all of the superhero stuff is just in the background. And you notice it and you see it and you see how they play with it and toy with it, but it's about the police work. And I believe as we move into the second volume, the police work is now still there, but the superhero tropes, the conventions of that type of storytelling start to invade and infuse the story more and more. To you get this hybrid now of what you might think a superhero cop story would actually be. It would be more of a mix of these things versus like just a straight procedural, which is what it was, what it felt like it more was in the first volume.
Yeah. All right. Should we get into? Obviously, we're not going to go beat for beat. We don't do that. Not a recap. Yeah. Do you want to get into issue 8?
I would love to. I'm curious what you think. So I sent you the little blurb from Wizard magazine. As I mentioned, this was an article that Wizard published in 2006, the 100 greatest single issue comic stories published since you were born, and they rated Top 10 number 8, number 1. And I sent you that blurb. And what they talk about there is, the focus is obviously on what's essentially a traffic accident, right? It's it's a teleportation accident. You have two travelers that get fused together on a molecular level, and as such, they can't be saved. There are no jaws of life here. They are just slowly dying at some point. They're alive simply out of circumstance, and it's only a matter of time. And and the story just progresses at an incredibly like kind of excruciating pace as they kind of go through all the stages of anger, denial, acceptance, all of this stuff here. And the blurb from Wizard focuses just on that part, which is the part of the issue that is the reason that issue 8 is so kind of revered and remembered. What I always forget about it is that that's maybe half the issue. That we keep jumping, we start
Right.
there and we end there and we jump back to it periodically, but there is so much other story going on at the precinct, and it's all these little catch-ups. As I mentioned, it's like we check in on what's happening with the Libra killer and all that. We check in with Dwayne's mom and the ultra mice and the cats. We get the start of Detective Corbo, King Peacock, and he's following up on the drug case, and he's going to be jumping to a parallel world, parallel 9. You get so much of the ongoing story as well intercut in there, but none of that stuff is ever remembered. It's just the pages that concern this teleportation accident and the arc that Alan Moore writes. And the way that story is presented is like it's so strong that it completely drowns out the other portions of the issue, and that's like half the issue, which I think is what's kind of amazing about that. That it's like half an issue's worth of material, and yet it's kind of so resonant, and it does so much in such a short amount of time that it just completely overpowers the narrative about this specific issue, and in a lot of ways the entire series, for better for worse in some ways.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, I have like literally 2 pages of a Word document that I typed. So I think it's a very strong issue. It is not as standalone as I would have assumed it was based on that article. Was my first thought. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's like you've got this essentially one-off traffic story that is your main ticket item,
which is the standalone portion.
It's correct. It's the standalone
Yes.
portion, but a reader would have trouble picking up issue 8 without any context for top 10 and like just connecting with it, because it'd be like, what is this guy talking about rats for? Like, why is there a cowboy there? Yada, yada, yada. Now, I think a savvy reader could just hang with it and whatever. So there are 2 different takes that I take away from this story. One of them I love, and one of them I feel tired of. And so it's really up to you to tell me what you think the issue's about,
right.
And then we'll decide whether I loved it or not. So interpretive option 1 is that no matter how advanced we get in society or our world, it is always the most basic realities that devastate us the most, or give us the most joy. So it's like, there's all this fantastical stuff, yet this is a traffic accident, and like they don't even know these guys, and they're like, the officers are like getting choked up and in tears because like it doesn't matter if they have superheroes, you still have to reconcile with death. Death is death. And I think that's a great, very potent reminder of like, I'm sure I've shared this before, but my sister-in-law went on like a Tinder date like 6 years ago, and the guy on the date was like, "Oh, well, like you and I, we're never gonna die. Like medical technology is advancing so quickly that like we'll just never have, we won't have to think of that. Like it will just keep pace with us, and we'll live, basically forever." And I was like, not a strong batting average in your favor. So far, you are 0 for billions.
Yeah. We're not doing good there. Yeah.
So, and then it's like, okay, well, let's say, we could keep our organs, running artificially in the brain and, get rid of cancer and all these diseases. You can still get hit by a bus.
Yeah.
So anyway, so if that's the take, is that, no matter how advanced the society gets, no matter what wonderful powers they have, death is still death, and you have to deal with that. That's wonderful. Now, if the main point of the book is the philosophical musings of the big guy, the horse guy, which, by the way, lettering in this issue, phenomenal.
It's so great when he speaks,
Yeah.
and it's so very jarring of just it's I didn't look at it exactly. I'm gonna guess it's probably not quite twice the size, but the font is just a little bit different. Like the eyes are a little different. Maybe it's like 1.5 times, but it's big enough that, like, even though the font is already all caps, you know that he's speaking in all caps. If that
Right.
makes sense, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
You hear it
the
as being
booming
louder.
voice.
Yes. You read it as louder. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fantastic.
So that's just shout out to Todd Klein.
Yeah.
Fantastic work there.
Small
Okay.
little thing that's so good.
So if his philosophical musing, which I enjoy all of the conversation, but his resounding point seemed to be like, it doesn't really matter if there's anything after this, because just look at how beautiful all this was, and we got to enjoy it. I have nothing wrong with that point of view, other than it was like such well-worn ground, especially in the 90s. And I started thinking this through, and I was like, man, I'm just like pulling comps right and left. I don't know if you're familiar with the song Pig from the Dave Matthews Band.
Of course, I am. I remember where I went to school.
Right. Yeah. 1998. One verse is this not enough? This blessed sip of life, is it not enough? Staring down at the ground, oh, and then complain and pray for more, like you greedy little pig. Or an American Beauty, 1999. It's hard to stay mad when there's so much beauty in the world, after, experiencing death and reflecting that just seeing beauty in the world is enough. Or go back to 94 with Gaiman and the Sandman. You get what everybody gets one lifetime. I could go on and on. I've got like a whole list here. And the Gaiman one is different. I'll grant you that. But there is still this. I think my problem with it is not only is it slightly overplayed, I also think that type of philosophizing is from a position of privilege, because it draws on the sentiment of like, in general, life's pretty good. It was pretty great. You get to experience a lot of beauty. And so you just take what you get, and, hoping for more after that is, is greedy or optimistic, or it's unnecessary. It's gratuitous. And if you were speaking to someone who had a miserable existence, I think it's a way of exposing privilege, basically, is to have that point of view. So I have complex thoughts and feelings about it, and not that it would not make it a bad issue, because either way, it got me writing and thinking, and I just had a blast, right? I mean, this is why I do this stuff, is like, you read a comic that makes me write 2 pages on a Word document, just like stream of consciousness typing and like pulling quotes from movies and songs and stuff like that. Like, that's this working at a high level. So anyway, I'm curious, did you take, or is there some third meaning that you think Moore was really driving at here? I don't think he was just doing this whole issue as a vehicle to put his words in the mouth of the horseman. I think he was just saying, the big horseman, this is one perspective on it. And this is how this guy makes peace with it.
I read I read what he says as different. It's not about like accepting your life and be like, isn't it great, and have these experiences, and that's life, and that, speaking from that spot of privilege. I read it, and I've kind of always read it as at the end there, when looking up at the skies, and it's just the idea that existence is what matters. Because I think at the end, what our human passenger, the one he's talking to, he feels he is coming, as he's accepting his death, the inevitable end here. He feels like in a way that it wasn't like, if this is how he's going to go out, then it wasn't then like, what was the point of all of this? And I feel like what the message that our game players getting across is just like, it's not about like what's good and what's bad in life, and what the experience is just that life exists, and that's what's important, and that there isn't that the fact that there is life and this light. And when he's looking up at the scars and he's saying, there is the great black, and strewn across.
It's about like a big sense of solidarity.
Yeah.
In like an evolutionary sense. It's like,
yeah,
look,
exactly. Yes.
We have perpetuated, even if we didn't directly reproduce, and perpetuate our species or our gene pool or anything, even broader, bigger picture.
Yes.
Life.
Because after that, when the guy looks back and says, and the great white, I mean, there's so much more black, are we losing? And the gameplay responds, no. Once there was only black, we are winning.
I'm looking at right now.
Right. Yeah. So just the idea of existence at all and being a part of it is what simply existing is why living matters. And I didn't look at it as a specific judgment on anyone's one in particular life. It's just the idea of existence, the idea of
that's a good.
I was going to say humanity, but obviously we're not talking about humans here in general. But yeah, just the idea of life is right. that there once was nothing and now there is something. And as long as there is something, as the game player says, then we are winning.
Yeah. I mean, at the bottom of the page, though, when he says, "Good, do not weep. Being is enough."
Yes,
that is all. I think that's where I started to interpret it around the other works that were coming out at that time. Mm-hmm. However, read in light of the top of the page.
Yeah,
I totally see what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's what he's saying there. Yeah, but going back to your first point there, I do think there is.
I mean, I think that's kind of the series in general, right? Is like,
yes, yeah,
all of the superhero stuff, and you still stub your toe, and it hurts.
100%. Yeah, I think it is. This is where it is still very consistent with the earlier part of the story, in that, again, this is their version of a traffic accident,
Yeah.
And the day starts and it's very normal. It's like, what do we got? Oh, there was a wreck.
Oh, and I do deeply
so,
enjoy showing people being annoyed at the airport. Yeah. Well, why is this delay? What's this delay about? And it's like,
even that
you just left the side of people weeping. Over this accident, and other people, it's just like, and that's the exact same thing. Like when you pull onto the highway and it's just a red line on your Google map and you're like, love them. And in all likelihood, there could be a car a mile away that's a ball of flames and someone just died. And you're like,
or it could be someone's radiator overheated.
Sit here, right?
Yes, it could be a flat tire that someone's in the middle lane and can't. One of the cops there, what she says, she's like, I hate accidents worse than murders. Accidents are just like random. And the next panel it says, I mean, all these people flying by, bitching about the detour, just everyday life, and then there's an accident. That's what it is. That you have no connection to it. All they know is it's interfering with your day and your routine, which is what happens every single day to everybody else in our world. It just so happens that their form of a car wreck, of an accident, is interdimensional travel, where beings get fused together on a molecular level, and that kind of juxtaposition, I think, is why those parts of the issue get elevated to the heights that it is. Because if you just took those pages out and just read that story there, that'd be a hell of a half issue. It'd be so good. And you wouldn't need to know anything else other than this is a world where everybody has superheroes, including the cops. And because the superpowers here are inconsequential. You just, this could be an episode of like a Dark Mirror episode of Star Trek, anything that's got teleportation, the idea of being and having the characters being able to communicate as they come to accept their fate. Cause like I said, there are no jaws of life here. The one passenger was like, he starts off by complaining, like, why am I still stuck here? Just cut me out. And no one ever tells him, because no one has the heart to tell him. He comes to the realization of like, oh, the reason I'm still here is because you can't, right? Like, you
Right.
can't cut me out of here. Like, we're together and this is it. And facing that and understanding that and coming to terms with that and the way that it plays out is why, again, why that this specific material is like, right, you can do this kind of storytelling. You can have a full arc of characters you just met that are just going to die, but you're going to feel all those emotions in a way that I think connects with anybody. You can tap into the idea of being with someone at the moment that they pass, whether it's a loved one or anything like that. Like, there's a helpless feeling there, and I think we see Paragon at the end there, which is an interesting part that I did want to mention, because it's not, they mention, and it's almost like a throwaway, the idea that Paragon, our cop here, the detective, maybe at this point, maybe it's a detective, I'm not sure, but they make a point to say that she is Christian, she's born again.
Yeah, I thought that was a weird inclusion.
And it's one of those things that it feels like the kind of thing they put out there that they're then going to explore a lot of. And
Right.
it only comes up again a little later when that her partner is Kowalski, who was our cop who can phase in and out, and we know she's gay, and it only comes up to the idea of like, is that a big deal? It's like, yeah, it's not really a big deal,
Right. Which is like,
and
interestingly, he's already
That-
showing a better path forward.
but that's what I was going to say. It feels like the kind of thing that, oh, you're going to bring this up here because now we're going to see how faith and religion plays into this world of superheroes, and we're going to bring that aspect in. And I'm not saying they punted it, but it never comes up again. It's never examined the way you might think it would, because you're absolutely right. It's thrown in here, and they're like, well, that's weird. Like, why would they point that out? The fact that she's Christian. Why do you? And
The dying guy is too, right? Or no, his wife was.
His wife was.
Just
Yeah.
Just his wife. Okay.
But that issue ends when they're placing the sheets over the deceased, and you see Peregrine like clearly bowing her head in prayer. And it just seems like, oh, okay, now that seems like the kind of thing, because you assume like, what are the hot button issues that Alan Moore can poke with the stick, and examine and break down. Faith and religion seemed like it would be one of them, and it just doesn't exist here in this book. And I find that really curious. Not that he would introduce it, but it's almost like the restraint he had to not go into it.
Well, I mean, I actually wonder if he thought about what would piss off 90s Christians more. Is, do you bring them in and then argue with them, or do you bring them in and represent them as being fine? Like, they're progressive. They're okay with, like, talking to someone who's who's gay.
But even then, like, they don't make a big deal. They don't. He doesn't even really do that, because there's never even a scene of Peregrine and Kowalski talking to each other about it.
Right, yeah. So
it's mentioned offhand by Kowalski.
You have to like imagine those lines intersecting just beyond the end of the pages.
Exactly. Yeah. So in which case that would defeat the purpose of trying to be any sort of instigator in either direction. But even here, it seemed like there was some potential runway to explore the idea of, I don't know, afterlife, salvation, anything like that. That just doesn't even play in here as well. And I hesitate to say missed opportunity, because it feels like I'm saying that Alan Moore and Gene Hans, like, they were obligated to do this because they brought it up. It seemed like a strange. It sounds wrong even saying that. You know what I'm saying? Like, it feels out of place.
Words of President Bartlett.
It feels out of place.
Knowing when to leave something on the table.
Yeah, but then,
I think again,
maybe so.
Why bring it up? Other than just
to say it, just to be like, hey, religion exists in this world. Born again Christians exist in this world.
I think that might be,
and maybe that's what it is.
What it is just to show, like, people
All
who are going
kinds.
to believe
Doesn't
this
matter.
stuff are going to believe it, whether there's superhero precincts or not.
Yeah,
And
maybe so. Maybe it's just it's not meant to be any more than just like the smallest bit of seasoning, just to say, yeah, you know what, religion
yeah,
still
I
exists here.
just took it as like a little texture, although I did like I did say like, oh boy, what's he gonna say next about, those pesky Christians? And then he didn't. And I was like, and then I had forgotten about the fact altogether.
And that reaction right there is what I was referring to, the idea that it's dropped in here now and you're immediately primed to think like, okay, like which issue is it, like one of these is going
Right.
to be the one where he goes at it in some way. He's gonna break this down and probably, because it's Alan Moore, right? He's gonna stick it to the uber conservative Christians, but at the same time, he's gonna skewer those on the other side. Like it's gonna be equal opportunity because it's Alan Moore, and that never happens. And you are right, though. By the time you get to the end, because of how they're weaving the story together, that just becomes like an inconsequential character bit. But when you're reading it in the moment, it does jump out, and maybe specifically here because it's brought up. It's first brought up in relation to death and dying, and the relationship that has with faith and religion and what that means. So it's almost like it got a little spotlight. It took a little specific spotlight to bring that character trait up, and then it evaporates and it goes away. It no longer, well, clearly it was never supposed to be important, but it seemed like it could have been, and then it wasn't. But I think it does, in some ways, it can make you think about what the role of religion would be in a society like this when everyone has powers. I think there is a conversation you can have, kind of, as you said, like just off panel between the
Yeah,
pages.
I mean, I think
If you want to go
some
down
of
that
the
road
best-
on your own, if you want to establish your own headcanon of like, what would it be like what is going to church like, what's the message like in a world where everyone has some sort of an extrasensory ability.
Okay,
Does
so are
does
you
the word
watching?
change at all?
Are you watching Severance, or did you
Yeah.
watch it?
Yeah.
I think that type of delivery is what you and I were both braced for, where like you hear Christopher Walken's character say like, "Oh, our pastor says that severed people have souls or whatever," and it's like, whoa, that's kind of a high voltage, line to throw out there. But then they sit at dinner and have a whole theological and ethical discussion about it. And it's like, yes, you're like thinking through it, you're litigating it a little bit.
Yeah.
Like you're giving it some oxygen to burn and not ruling on whether they're right or wrong.
You're
Like,
having the conversation.
yes.
You hope your viewers are having. You let your characters have it, because there may be the characters may be considering this idea for the first time when it's introduced, just like the audience may be considering it the first time when it's introduced. So
Yes.
you're right. You're having it at the same time. Yeah. Definitely.
So that to me is like, and perhaps it's because we both just watched that show not that long ago, where like something comes up like that, it's usually not just for texture. Like it's usually going to be, and that was, in my review of, season 2 of Severance, I was saying like, a lot of these like story arcs for like individual episodes don't really matter. Like you could have cut all of the Irvin and Christopher Walken stuff, and it doesn't matter for the plot, but it does matter for the setting, and it matters for the world. It matters for the texture and depth.
It matters to
fleshing out the idea,
the world building. Yeah.
And that's not nothing. And my gosh, you can't criticize Alan Moore's world building in this book. Like I can't think of anyone who's dropped more stuff. And like, every time he says something and you're like, I don't even know what this character's talking about. Alan Moore does. Yeah. Like he knows exactly, what they're talking about, what event in their world they're referring to, like all the slang and jargon he invents, like all of that. It's like, it's almost like a token level, depth to it for this little 12-issue series.
And there is the meta aspect of, at this point, Alan Moore is already Alan Moore. And so the assumption that readers bring into it is whatever he does, it's important, whether that's fair or not, right? But if Alan Moore has done this, it is capital I important. And so everything that's in it, Like nothing is in here by chance, right? It can't be. It's Alan Moore. Everything has to mean something, whether it does or not, because it's Alan Moore. There is a baggage that I'm sure if you asked him about, he would say he hates, and probably call readers idiots. But
Regurgitated worms or
yeah,
something. It's something drastic.
it is an inevitable fact that readers just have that relationship to his work. And so any little bit he throws in there, whether you know exactly what he's talking about, or if you know what he's alluding to, or if you're completely lost by it, you have it in your head that, well, I got to pay attention to this
Right.
because it's going to be important. It's going to matter, it's going to pay off. And I mean, that's an unfair expectation for any creator, even Alan Moore. But it's because of that initial mindset that when you have an issue like issue 8 that is clearly throwing out just some larger existential ideas, whether there are any conclusions at all to them, it in a way artificially inflates those ideas because they come from Alan Moore.
Yes.
They're already going to be at a certain level, but they do get raised to a point because you're like, well, like if anybody else did this, it'd be good. But because Alan Moore has done it, it's great. And that's probably unfair, but it's also entirely true.
Yeah. Wow. Well, the issue 8 discussion is everything I hoped it would be. But like it was hard sitting on it last week.
Yeah. It's a hard break there, knowing that you're going to have that issue here, which is, again, as you said, like it because of the acclaim that it has gotten in the past, now 15 plus years since that Wizard List came out. That Wizard List came out and everyone was like, oh yeah, that was totally a great issue. I've totally read that. When like at that point, like probably no one had read it. It had been out maybe 5-6 years. That issue 8 would have been sometime probably like in 2000,
Yeah. I looked it up just now. You can still buy it below cover price.
Oh yeah, it's
like,
available. It's out
condition.
there.
Like,
yeah,
it's not. It is like the comic reader's comic.
Yeah,
it is not the collector's. That's
I may have said this in the Zero, is like there's a hipster quality to that, to be like the best single issue story of all. This is a book called Top 10. Oh, you never read it? Oh, well, it's Alan Moore, right? Oh, you didn't know that? Like,
right.
There is that level of like, oh, you just read Spider-Man and Batman? Oh, well, listen, So there is a part of that built into it, but it's still, there is so much good stuff there, and it does in a way overshadow the rest of the book, because I think what happens in the back half of this volume, in the back half, which we'll call like, the setup is at 8 as things storylines start tying together, but 9, 10, 11, and 12, I think there are some really interesting wrap up points there in terms of how they tie all the things together. Whether or not I think it needed to tie and resolve all these pieces is a different story, but the fact that they did do it and how they did it and how they brought characters back, I think, that's just competent storytelling.
Yeah.
They don't leave anything on the table. They brought it all in there. Again, whether or not they needed to, I wouldn't think they needed to, but clearly they decided that's what they wanted to do. And so they found a way to naturally and kind of seamlessly bring all these seemingly disparate random cases and tie them all together and wrap it all up in a way that sets up the book for potential future story or never having to return to it, which weirdly the book does both.
That is a true anomaly.
Yeah. It's totally set up for sequels and spinoffs, and also be like, you know what, we're stopping right here. It serves both functions.
Yeah. I mean, again, that is part of, like, I think the innate hipster quality of Alan Moore is he can be like, oh yeah, I made something great. Don't ever adapt it. Don't touch it.
Yeah.
Don't do anything. Like, I'll move on. I've got other ideas.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you not love that? Like, it can be infuriating when there is something you want more of. And like, something like Watchmen, where it's like, okay, clearly DC is going to do something more with this. They're not going to leave it alone. Wouldn't you rather be the one, in charge of it? And he's like, nope, don't care. It's dead to me. Um,
Yeah, like when he's done with something, I think he's done with something. It's
right.
on to the next thing.
And he's just never makes a decision motivated by money,
No,
um,
no.
which is, incredibly admirable. Unfortunately, I think there are just a lot of writers and comic creators out there who literally can't afford the luxury of his principled stances. Like,
Well, yeah, no,
you
of
know,
course they can't. You have to work, but he is in a position, because of his success, even without whatever royalties he's due for Watchmen that he's been denied. Uh, I still think he's doing all right because he's still Alan Moore. So
oh yeah.
yeah,
Um, Great. Well, yeah, I didn't have much to say about 9 and 10. The Gladiator plot line is like, yeah, it's like it's fine.
it's a side. Well, again, it's a side thing that's a one-off that becomes relevant when you find out that it wasn't some bureaucratic screw up. It was an intentional misdirect by the commissioner because
Oh yeah,
she's
and
the
you
drug.
could
Yeah,
not, and you, I
and,
mean,
and
like
you
you
wouldn't know that at the
couldn't.
time. At the time, you just read it and you're like, okay, so we're in a world where the Roman Empire, which is strange. There's always anytime there's a parallel universe somewhere out there, any stories about parallel universes, inevitably there's always a world where the Roman Empire doesn't fall.
Well, let me tell you,
Yeah.
there's always every version. What's the best way to say this? There's always every version of white success, like every
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
white empire in the
But
history
okay,
of the
but,
world.
but here's the thing. It, there,
Western
there,
civilization, I
there
guess.
aren't, you don't see as many versions where the ancient Greek Empire survives. If
Not
there's
as
an
many,
ancient,
but you
if
do
there's
have
an ancient,
plenty of books about like the
oh
Greek
yeah,
gods at like being in the modern world. You've
that is
got
that is the ideas live
you
on,
got
but
which I think
anytime,
is more iconic of the Greeks than
yeah,
like their military empire.
yeah.
Although I would say there are frequently like Spartan type things, like the warriors. So, they'll
Yeah, yeah, those ideas exist. I'm saying like a parallel world. There are two that
where the
always seem
Greeks
to
run
pop
the
up.
world. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always one where there's a parallel world where the Roman Empire never fell, and there's a parallel world where ancient Egypt takes over. Like those are the two that people are fascinated by. Like, if this persisted, what does this look like with a modern spin on it? So it seems like this is sort of a play on that. But you're right. It is a weird one-off. That these specifics really have no import to the story at all. It's just like, okay, he was there to investigate a crime, and then he gets put into a interdepartmental, like it isn't some random
Oh,
combat.
that's the
Like
worst part of it is, yeah,
it is a
when he
cop
has
from
to
every
slay
precinct.
that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
well, and like who would make a mech T-Rex, like mini T-Rex or Raptor or whatever he was?
yeah.
Like, you know, that's the type of silliness that this book embraces. But it's like, oh, so you can make fully animatronic, fully functional, uh, you know, sentient beings,
Mhm.
and the form you've gone with is tiny armed. Like,
Yes,
is that the best law enforcement? Or would a humanoid one maybe be better? Or
yeah.
like, since we can do whatever we want, let's go centaur. You
Maybe,
know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Although we do see sentient, AI in Joe Pye, after their resident robot, girl one is killed. They got a transfer officer in Joe Pye, who comes from Turingville, which is an AI cyber governed parallel world. And I think it's an interesting version of AI and computer intelligence, especially now. Clearly, because when Officer Pye shows up, he's given the cold shoulder, right? On two fronts. One, he's replacing a fallen colleague, and two, like there's a clearly some bit of I don't know, distrust of Parallel 9 and AI. But he comes in and like, what does he do? Like, he's clearly a great investigator. He solves a crime in like 3 minutes, right? He understands human interaction, right? He understands jokes and pranks and sarcasm and things like that. And he warms up to people, and it's like, oh well, yeah, clearly it's almost like, yeah, robots and AI, not so bad. Which is not the way you would treat it now. Now you would set that up and be like, oh well, this is just a setup for him to destroy everybody.
Right.
This is just a ruse. This is a facade for him to ultimately turn on everyone and kill the whole precinct. But it's interesting the way it's presented here, almost like when you think about the end of the 90s, right? We were very much worried about the creeping scope of technology, and it's like they're playing on those fears here, except the end result is, surprise, it's actually good, versus the dystopian version, right?
Well, that, and we were like prematurely panicking about it in the late 90s,
because
and now it's here and there's nothing we can do,
because we didn't know. We were imagining what the future would be with technology that was going to be obsolete in a handful of years. You know, we didn't understand what the leap in our technology would be to understand what the danger of technology could be, because we're thinking about how much technology and where we were in the late 90s, early aughts, right? With classic movies about technology and computers, whether it's hackers or the net or like The Matrix or whatnot, you know, we couldn't conceive of where we would actually get to. So which is why we look back on those stories and they seem quaint and ridiculous. But it feels like they were almost playing on those fears, and then turning it on its head, be like, no, not so bad. Because you're right. We get to it now, and like we were so far down the rabbit hole before anyone looked back and like, wait, where are we? And it's like that ship is so far out of the sea, like there is no turning back. You know,
it's almost like
we got on
same
and
exact
never looked back.
Who were in Congress in the late 90s not paying attention to those conversations are somehow still there.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't be right, because then they'd all be in their 70s.
I know.
And
It's
not
weird.
understand technology.
I know. Yeah. They didn't understand it then and definitely don't understand it now. So, but
like,
yeah.
I sent it all to you in a PDF. Nope.
Yeah. Yeah. That's too much right there.
A bridge too far.
How do you open that thing?
Yeah.
But again, I do think it's interesting that that they present a fully AI character in that way. A fully AI character with the most humanity, like the most empathy, the most understanding. It is a curious choice to read now, because now
it's a subversive choice for sure, especially and
it's still a subversive choice now. It's still one now to because you read it now and
where does that programming come from?
Exactly. Yes.
Because the earliest like AI stuff I remember, I know AI has been around for 40 years in like some capacity, but the earliest AI stuff I remember was when people programmed Twitter bots. This was like 2010s, and they had to shut them off because they turned into like Nazis within 48 hours.
Yeah,
and they were only learning behavior from other Twitter users.
Yeah,
and it's like, how could an AI stay pure and untainted when we're so messed up? When we are the problem.
Well, that's what I'm saying about this. Like the idea that you look at it now and your base assumption is, well, the whole thing that Officer Pi has is fake. He's going to turn. He's actually bad because we think AI is bad. So even presenting this now, 25 years later, it still is a subversive presentation, because your expectation now, even more so than it was 25 years ago, is that artificial intelligence equals bad. You know, our perspective is the perspective of all the cops in Precinct 10 when he shows up, where everyone's wary of him. No one trusts him. No one trusts that he can do his job, that he's going to do anything. You know, the fact that, it's like a horrifying scene, but I love the way it's presented when, during the whole standoff with the Sentinels and all that, and as they're trying to arrest all these people, when Irma, Smacks, and Joe are trying to get to what's his name, Atom Man, right? He's clearly the super analog. He's the leader of the set.
You found the name.
I know. I had it written down.
Honestly,
I wrote it in my notes. I had to find it in my notes. That's why, because otherwise I wouldn't have remembered. So yeah, he's a leader, right? He's the leader of the Sentinels, and he's barricaded himself in his, I don't know, his panic room or whatnot. And they realize that, like, he even if we capture him and send him to jail, his because of his powers, his long lifespan, like he's gonna outlive multiple murder convictions. So like, what good is that? And so then, like, Joe basically reverse psychologists this guy into killing himself, by basically goading him into being like, well, hey, yeah, you'll outlive, but, like, man, you'll be in jail with all the bad guys that you put in there, and they're all going to know that you're even worse than they are. Only thing that can stop you, or whatever his kryptonite is. And he basically said he incepts him into taking his own life. And at the end, Joe is like, oh, that was too bad, wasn't it? I guess I got to go back and file my report on my bad performance as a hostage negotiator, whatever. Like,
Right.
he plays it all. Like, there is the way that's presented of, like, his ability, I guess, in a way to disassociate, but also be like, the world's a better place without this pedophile in it, and to rationalize that and accept that and do the thing maybe that human couldn't do, or the thing that, like, Irma or Smax would want to do, but maybe because he's a robot, he can get away with it. I don't know. But the way that that's presented shows a weird level of humanity in a very weird, twisted way.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially when, like, you're getting the full range of humanity here, right? Because you're also
Yeah.
talking about, like, pedophile rings. You're, like, talking about the worst of the worst and the best of the best,
Yeah.
existing at the same time in the same place, regardless of how fantastical the world is. Let me tell you, the very last page of the book, though, rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. So I feel like Alan Moore, like, would it had still been considered progressive to have a gay character in the 90s whose, like, main thing isn't that they're gay, that it just happens to be their attribute?
Yes, it would have been.
I was like,
but
I think
also, I think it's important that, because obviously the captain isn't Trainer. He's not the first gay character in the book. We have gay characters from the
he's
jump.
not. But he
the fact that he's old, the
and
fact that
afraid
he's
of being
old.
outed.
Yeah.
So, like, because, like, when that alien threatens to like out him, he gets a little look of, like, panic on his face, even though it's socially acceptable.
Yeah.
He clearly has some stigma from, generations past. But what I think what rubbed me the wrong way was, he says, well, they're all nasty bastards. They were a pedophile ring, for God's sake. And he says, I don't know. And then he says, no, well, I do, sweetheart. You're thinking about 49. Boy, in that uniform, you were something. And he says, hey, I was a dirty old fruitcake, even back then, like I'd pass on a jet lad. The difference is I loved you and still do. So, like, they started saying, like, hey, is our relationship really so different than the pedophile ring? And it's like, oh my God, who would have this conversation? I understand there was the age gap, and that's what he was saying, was 24 and 16.
Yeah, but what that scene, I excuse me, knowing what comes next in that scene there. So the going a few pages earlier, that when Smax visits Robin, which is a toy box in the hospital, he talks about how he got a letter from his homeland, and that his uncle died, and he has to go back for the funeral, and toy box is like, "Listen, do you want to come along?" Because clearly Smax is really moved by this. And he's like, "Yeah, that'd be great." That story becomes the Smax miniseries that Alan Moore writes with Zander Cannon.
I had read that in other people's reviews.
So they're setting up the next story there, right? And then a few pages later, we get Captain Trainer going home to Wolf, the old Sky Shark, and he specifically mentions, "Oh, you're thinking about 49, right?" Well, that leads directly into the original graphic novel that Alan Moore writes with Gene Ha art, called The 49ers, which is about the origins of Neopolis and the beginnings of Precinct 10. So those are, in my mind, knowing it's hard to read now, knowing that there were follow-ups and direct follow-ups and sequels to those stories, to see those things as anything other than we're just setting up what we're doing next. You know, it's hard for me to see those in any sort of character moment, even though that's what it would have been when you read this in would have been what, '01, and I think it was '05 or '06 when the Smack series and the 49ers came out. They both came out the same year. So it would have been, there would have been a gap in time before those stories came out, and even probably before they were announced. But it's clearly a setup for, or sorry, in hindsight, it's obviously a setup for the immediate stories and the last stories that Alan Moore would write in this world. So I can't read that now in anything other than just, we're going to drop this in there and make people buy the next story that we're doing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's just good business. I mean, it's also good storytelling to like, Aaron Sorkin always uses pool terminology and refers to it as like having a leave on the table.
Yeah, you're setting up your next shot. Yeah, and so which is why the specific is, you're thinking about 49, and then it's understood that the characters know what they're talking about, but the audience is like, what happened in 49? You know,
right.
So yeah,
and then it says end of season 1 on the same page.
Exactly. Yeah, and so the idea that it's setting you up for what comes next, even though Alan Moore isn't involved in season 2 or anything after that. He is involved with those next specific tie-in, that spin-offs with, one with Zander Cannon, one with Gene Ha. So they are like, quote unquote, officially part of the story. And we probably could have included them in our discussion here, except like Smacks is such a radically different book. Like it's a completely different style. It's a different genre. It's super weird. Like I can't even express how weird of a book it is.
I've actually heard good things about it.
It's fun.
Now, like fans of Top 10 seem to like it. Like I don't think anyone read that without having read Top 10 unless they're just confused.
Yes, yeah. It's not. I'm trying to say it's not bad, but like if the things you liked about Top 10 were like the procedural aspect and all that stuff, like. That's not what Smacks is. Like that premise is completely out the window. We're just taking these characters and going back and seeing what Smacks' home world is like, the world he came from. And it's not even a left turn from what Top 10 is. Like it's a different street. Like you're not turning off of where Top 10 is. Like you're not even on the same mode of transportation anymore. Like it's so radically different. But it's a fun read. Just don't look for any kind of connective tissue for it. And
right.
I mean, you have the compendium there. So if you have the full compendium, I suggest reading all of the rest of Top 10. If anything else, just because I'm a completionist, so I read everything that's out there.
It's one of those
tonally,
where, like,
it shifts very big from each of the stories. There are big tonal shifts.
The density of it is why I haven't, and especially the density of it when we're doing this every week with other books. If we ever get, if we ever get an easy, like I think about how easy we had it back when we started this podcast with Paper Girls. Like those trades are like. It's a confusing book at first, but it's not a hard read and it's not a long read. And we were only doing one trade at a time.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the line, we got into the habit of doing like 2 trades, deluxe editions, like
that was the Unwritten's fault, wasn't it? Yeah.
Full 10, 12 issues.
The Unwritten, I think, was because that was
the Unwritten showed us what we could do.
Yeah.
And the Unwritten is one where like I've chewed on that more and more, and I'm like, I could probably talk about that again, like if I wanted to, and I would go slower. I would I would go one trade at a time and just like go into all the literary references and all the stuff in that book. We got, I think we we nodded at it when it was like, oh, and here they go into Arabian Nights, and it's like I actually don't know that much about Arabian Nights, and it would have been fun to go really deep, but. The Unwritten is one of those books that's so meta. Yeah, you would never plumb the depths of it. Just like we were just talking about a single issue of Deep Cuts, and the artist comes in and blows our minds with the whole Wizard of Oz thing, or Joe Clark does. Then you talk to the artist,
writer did,
and then we talked to the artist, and it was like, oh, it's not just that; it's also da 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 da. And it's like, oh my gosh. Like every single issue has so much
Yeah, and
potential in it.
we could look at especially 8 here if we want to try to break down all the Easter eggs, everything they've thrown in there. Like
We could do a full one
there
hour
are
follow up to this episode, just doing the Easter eggs in
background
1 through 12,
yeah,
or 1
just
through 10.
doing background jokes and characters. There are so many levels to how you want to enjoy the book. You can get it on the surface, you can look at the deeper commentary, you can look at the random stuff in the background. I think when a book has all that, that there's when it gives you all those potential flavors where none of them, so where you don't have to get all of them to enjoy the book. You can take it on whatever level you want, and you still get something out of it. You get the intended story, you get the intended feeling that the creators wanted, but you come to it at whatever level you want to, or whatever level you're at, and it still works totally fine. And I think stuff like that is really, really great. Like I said, you don't have to know all the stuff, the superhero stuff that more Cannon Ha threw in here. You don't have to know all the police procedural stuff. You don't have to know Hill Street Blues or NYPD Blue or any of these. You don't have to know these cop stories. You just have to know they exist. You just have to know have an understanding of what they are to get what the specific workplace drama aspect of the story is. It just, if you do have all that knowledge, you just get more and more layers of it, but none of them are necessary to enjoy the book.
Yeah. Well, that is all of my thoughts. I mean, it was just cathartic to type out a bunch of stuff. That's all I care to talk about with this book. Do you have any concluding thoughts on the top 10? Like, I mean, should they have just left it at this?
Well, the part of me that if Alan Moore, if Moore, Ha, and Cannon wanted to keep doing this specifically in this style, said not the spin-offs are fine, but if they came back and wanted to keep doing it, 1,000%, I want to keep that team together. But a note I've had for both for both last week and this week that we hadn't really, it doesn't fit into right. It didn't come up until like right now, within a really good unintentional setup in terms of what would you want next, was the idea of what this book's specific legacy is. And the most obvious one, again, that I had this note, I've had the note actually for all 3 weeks, just I hadn't found a place to put it in, is Powers, which is a book by Brian Michael Bendis and Michael Omig. It is essentially so the best comp I can say is if top 10 is Hill Street Blues or NYPD Blue, that kind of procedural cop drama, Powers is Homicide: Life on the Street or The Wire. It's taking the conventional idea of a procedural cop drama and giving a different spin on it. Like top 10 is a Dick Wolf show. Powers is a David Simon show. It's that sort of thing, but it's the same bones. It's people with superpowers investigating crimes. Like, well, what does police work look like with that? And so when you ask, like, do I want more stories in this universe? And I say yes, only if these creators are back doing it. Otherwise, what I would want is what the next evolution is. And that is a book like Powers, for this specific kind of police veneer of superheroes. It would be what comes next, and what books does this influence, and how do we see that play forward, and what's the next iteration on this idea? And that is the Bendis and Oming book. That is Powers.
Meanwhile, I'm thinking of the TV show Powerless, which was like the people working at
that's Damage Control. Yeah. Now there was a Powers adaptation. They actually did a. I was thinking of the show with Danny Pudi. I know. Yeah, that is Powerless. Yeah. I'm saying
that was Powerless.
There actually was an adaptation of Powers.
Right. I think what I would enjoy is the top 10 continuation, where you almost get a retread of some of the same story, but from just outside Neapolis. Like what is the powerless precinct in the powerless part of the world? Like, how are they impacted by all the crazy, like, intergalactic traffic problems and everything else caused by these people, and
In
why
a
don't
way
they hate
that's-
them all? And
In a way,
I meant
that's
to talk about
that's like Gotham Central. In a
well,
way,
and
that's
that
Gotham Central.
is a book that I have
in a lot of
thought
ways.
again and again about. Like, we really need to do that, and it's been on our list, even though it's a big two, but it's like big two ish. One thing I meant to mention was, that when the public finds out that their beloved heroes are in a pedophile ring, the devastation, and I had the thought of like, maybe they're a little too quick to erect statues in this world and our world. Like, we're too quick to become fans of things, because I think it's in issue 8. You got one cop sitting around the precinct playing the top 10 video game.
Yes,
like, based on them. And Smax is in it. And it's like,
Smax is in it, Irma's in it,
still
Girl
working.
1 is in it.
Like, you have like put merch on this and immortalize someone who could still have a terrible fall from grace.
Yeah.
And that was another thing. And it was like such a small drop in. But it was
a throwaway
so telling
joke
about the world.
It's a throwaway joke because Girl 1 is playing as herself, and she's complaining that her character can't do the things that she can actually do. It's like when football players play Madden and get angry at their player rating because they think they're being devalued. Like, they're like, no, I'm faster than this. I'm stronger than this. Like, they don't like their rating. It's that level of meta there. And that is a good point. I actually did have that note there, that level of meta of although I didn't think about it in the term that you did, which I really like, is that idea of celebrity culture. That the reason this exists here is because they are being celebrated because they're the cops, or not because they're cops, but because they're personalities, they're celebrities, and so they are immortalized in this game. And I think the comp would be like Madden or NBA 2K or something like that. The comp in our world would be,
or how Alan Moore feels about Comic Cons.
It could be that too. Yeah.
Like, I don't remember when it was he withdrew going to them, but I would imagine it's been several decades.
I doubt he's been to one in 40 years almost. Yeah, man.
Right. No, but I think by the time this was written,
at least 30 years.
He was
at
probably
least 30,
sick of his
years.
own celebrity culture.
Oh, he definitely was. Definitely was. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I just want to tell stories. This is my job.
I didn't think about it in the way of celebrity in how specifically those cops would be viewed in Neapolis, the way that we view any other celebrity in our world. Now, I didn't think about it in that way. I just thought it as like a general meta commentary, but I do like that. That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I had. It sounds like all you had, although obviously, we may like both be laying in bed tonight and think, shoot. So there might be
5 more things.
There might be like a small addendum, bonus content between weeks if there's something that really needs to come out. Otherwise, thank you for listening. Thank you for reading along. And we will be back next week with another intro Zero episode and, let you know where we're going from there.
Yep. Peace.